Hello everyone, and welcome. So initially the title of this evening's class was going to be a Tale of Two Titanics. But being that lately in the news there's this new phenomenon, a new discussion about the vices of the internet, and this coming Sunday there are I think 42,000 people supposed to be gathering, religious Jews, in Citifield Stadium to discuss an emergency meeting about the internet and its challenges to our youth and so on. I thought it appropriate to address this because many people have been asking me about it. Now, if you haven't heard of this, now you have, so what can I say? As someone that wears a beard and a yarmulke, so I clearly am against my will sometimes, at the brunt of people's wrath against religion. And of course, I'm challenged very often, being that I speak in many different type of venues, including secular audiences. So it's always the question of this whole thing about orthodox Jews and religious Jews. When you hear the news about the condescension or judgmentalism or the dogma that religion is so often associated with, every few months another headline pops up about these topics, and it's a common theme today about when you see the more fundamentalist segments of any religion, whether it's Muslims or Jews, and they leave a very bad taste in many people's mouths because it creates the images, the stereotype at least is of, as I said, condescension, judgmentalism, insulation, and almost like an us and them attitude, which is a big turnoff for many. Now, I grew up in the traditional Jewish world, so I'm quite familiar with the challenges of any strong system of tradition, because when you're dealing with a world like ours, and when you're dealing with people who have insecurities, you're always going to find people build up walls to insulate themselves, protect themselves, so to speak, from the evils of the world around them. On the other hand, we live in a so-called open secular world, which dramatically changed several hundred years ago as a result of emancipation, the Enlightenment, the changes that took place, whereas 300-400 years ago, the monarchs and the church leaders that ruled most of the world, whether it was in the West or in the East, really didn't consider anybody's individual rights or freedoms. And the whole issue of religion was a non-issue then. I mean, the classic story of Galileo, captivates the imagination of our times, where the church forced him to recant his scientific conclusions because it contradicted the church doctrine. So ever since, in the last few centuries, has been a battle, some call the battle between science and religion, or faith and reason, and really it's the bigger battle of faith and modernity. And the fact is, today we live in a world, especially in the Western world, which is not as religious as it once was. I mean, religion still exists, but it's a much far more complicated issue, with many people who may even have religious leanings, don't feel comfortable in their religious environments, in synagogues, or for that matter, churches or mosques. And you have today what's called a more type of open-ended, called spirituality, which is not associated by many with being religious, with religion being more associated with doctrine and dogma and rituals. Spirituality is considered to be something more of an enlightening and transcendent type of experience. So I'm really just covering the whole spectrum, and I don't know where each of you fit, or what your lives have, where you've had to deal with these issues. But it's very clear that we live in a world where there's a lot of confusion around this. And Judaism particularly suffers because it's been around longer than any other religion. And it goes back to Sinai, and has a very serious and intense system of laws that regulate our lives, from those of kosher to Shabbat to holidays There's no area in life that Judaism doesn't have something to say about. And yet, the question is, how does it fit into our modern world? So we really have almost like a break into two different worlds, where you have some called the ultra-orthodox, who see the secular world as a threat. And though they engage it to do business, but they really see it as not our world. And will not mingle, will not go to dinner, will dress differently, will do everything possible to keep themselves insulated from so-called the evils of the Western world. Another form of it is in Islam, the Muslim world. Even the more secular Muslims do see the West as somewhat decadent in its values. And if you go to any Muslim country, the standard there is, even Turkey, perhaps a more secular Muslim country, but also it is, if you've ever been there, religion is a very dominant force. Europe and the United States, it's less dominant, the separation of church and state, and it's a different type of relationship. But whenever you go into any religious circle, you're always going to have these issues. How do they deal with the world? Since September 11th, Americans have been very intrigued and also disturbed by Muslim fundamentalism, because now it hit home. In the name of religion, people blew up the World Trade Centers and attacked this country, and all kinds of terrorism, on the name that we, the Western world, is a decadent world, is a world that is going against God's will. So these things leave very difficult. These things, as I said, leave a very bad impression in our minds. So when you start hearing about people making all kinds of claims that they want to do things either to ban the internet or to how do you deal with the evils of it, it elicits in my mind as well, very disturbing feelings. So what does this mean? You only want to take the benefits of the modern world and reject the rest of it, and how do we find balance in a world like ours? So really it addresses the bigger issue of faith and modernity. And to make it relevant to each of us, we all have these challenges. We live in a world where, who determines what values are values? If you ask yourself a question, what values do you embrace and what values don't you embrace? So of course, in the beginning of our lives, the values that we're first exposed to are our parents' values. And then either we can maintain those values or we reject them. And what other values do we pick up? Usually what we pick up around us. There's peer pressure, there's our schooling, and then there's our spiritual journey. Some people who by nature are more spiritually oriented explore and search. Some are seekers, as they say. Many in our generation, the last generation, have found spirituality through unorthodox methods. This can be through psychedelics, through Far Eastern disciplines, including many Jews. I think they say that 60% of the Buddhists in America are Jewish, which of course suggests that the Jews are seekers and they don't find it in their own backyard, they seek elsewhere. So every one of us has somewhere the conflict between that's called our transcendental needs and our survival needs. Most of our time, most of our day, we spend surviving. This includes eating, sleeping, shopping, taking care of our immediate needs. And then we have very little time for what we call transcendental needs. This would include whether it's through romance or through love and romance, or through or spirituality and religion, or art or music or other hobbies or travel. People have their ways of, I don't know if the word is escaping, but relieving themselves, some relief from the existential angst of the daily grind of life. Everybody has that need. And these two come in conflict with each other. They're very hard to reconcile. So what most of us do, we compartmentalize. But then there are times where there's direct clash. There's a direct clash. And you see it especially by Jews, you see it in Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur season, or other holiday seasons. On one hand, there's like a certain type of eagerness and interest to have some type of spiritual opening. But then you go to many synagogues, and many people will say, it never satisfies. It's either boring, or mechanical, or just done. People just do it by habit, by routine, and not necessarily feel a deeply spiritual experience. So the question is, where then do you go for some direction, some type of soul healing. Some people feel that therapy has replaced, in a way, somewhat religion. Once upon a time you went to a soul doctor, a mystic, or a healer, and today it's therapy that uses the word psychology as an understanding of the inner workings of the human psyche and soul. Others say that music has replaced, in many ways, religion. You have a rock concert. As you could say, is almost like a pilgrimage, especially the Grateful Dead ones. And the hall is like a cathedral, and the music is like a prayer. And you see the ecstasy and the high that it creates in people. It's very similar to what was often compared to religious highs, except here it does not be called religion. The interesting thing is music is often called soul. Soul, whether it's a genre of music called soul, or in general it touches the soul. And music is language of the soul. And it does evoke and resonate within us a certain inner voice that helps us escape or get beyond the trappings of daily life. You plug into music, you put your headset on, you put your earphones on, you block everything else out, you just can travel, be transported to another time and place. And religion does not do that. But then we have this anomaly, which always dominates the headlines, as I said, these black, coated, white shirts, sometimes with payas, sometimes with a strimal, sometimes looking a little more like me, that walk the streets of Manhattan. And you've probably met them, right? You see them. And sometimes you know them, sometimes you don't know them. Usually you don't know them. And they don't seem to mingle. They don't seem to be like of the same, it's like the Amish. It's like a creature of a different ilk. And I don't know, maybe you see me this way. I do wear a beard and a yarmulke, But obviously we're all human beings, and you'd expect that people shouldn't draw any conclusions and pass judgment until you meet someone and talk to them. Unfortunately, religion has become a very stifling and conformist type of approach. You don't necessarily see people who are very religious as being visionaries, people who have a universal perspective on things. It's associated much more with the words I used before, judgmentalism, condescension, anger even, which is also associated with God, an angry God, a vengeful God, and so on. So, clearly, from my perspective, I can tell you this is all really a major tragic distortion. And it's true that many thousands of many Jews who seem to dress as religious people perhaps are missing the whole boat, they're missing the whole point. That's something I discussed last week and 2 weeks ago about the whole Torah is based on the concept of love. Love your fellow as yourself. This is the whole foundation of the Torah. So you would think that someone who's really more religious would be more spiritual, more refined, more sensitive, more loving. And that's not usually the reaction most of us have. We see religion, as I said, more judgmental, actually less sensitive, and less loving, and less accepting. Which of course is turns the whole thing upside down. It's not just different, it's diametrically opposed to what it says in Judaism and Torah, that it's all about more love. So then when you hear this news about 42,000 frum Jews, religious Jews gathering to bemoan or complain about or whatever, rise up in arms about the vices of the internet, you start wondering, what is this exactly? And what is the Torah approach to questions like this? There was once a thing called a printing press. Gutenberg in the 16th century, 15th century, discovered the printing press, and books were published. Did the Torah sages also gather up in arms that we should now ban books or burn books? On the contrary, the Torah is the book. We are people of the book, and if anything, Gutenberg, the first book published was the Bible. And then came the Talmud, and came all the books that the Jews have always used manuscripts, now had the capacity to publish them in printing them. So knowledge and information was always something that Jews always pursued. Not only pursued, they were teachers. We were always scholars. Our ancestors that's what they were doing. They were studying scholarship. It was an essential part of Judaism. It's one of the biggest mitzvahs. Teach your children, educate them. Education, knowledge was always considered to be a great virtue. And the truth is, over the Middle Ages, knowledge and education was not in the domain of the masses, it was the domain of the elite. But by Jews, scholarship was always a necessity, and children were always taught. We say in the Pirkei Avos, when you're 5 years old, you teach you teach a child verse. At 10, the Mishnah. At 15, the Talmud. And there's a whole scholarship focus. When I went to yeshiva systems, and today as well, I don't know if you'd be surprised to hear this. I don't know if any of you went to yeshiva, formal yeshiva. Yeshiva, even when you're already 8, 9 years old, you're going from 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, sometimes till 9 o'clock at night. School does not end at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It ends at evening. All day is study. This doesn't mean necessarily everybody's studying all the time. Kids are kids. But the standard is there. The standard is there. So knowledge is always considered to be a great blessing. So when you look at the internet or technology per se is a great opportunity for disseminating knowledge, information. So that can be the bad part of it. So it's true, it poses challenges. Yes, today you can sit in the privacy of your home and not have to be exposed and look at things that once upon a time you had to go somewhere to see, whether it's pornography or other stuff. Today you can be anonymous, and it's true. So it opens up a challenge that didn't exist before. But the question really is, how do you look at all of this? So I do want to connect it to the Titanic. I know you may think, what's the connection? There's a connection. Everything has a connection. And I want to address it also, being that next week is Shavuos, the holiday, next Friday night. Oh, it's actually next Saturday night, but the holiday begins Saturday, goes into Sunday, Monday. So Shavuot will be the 3,324th anniversary of Sinai. So I thought it'd be interesting to the convergence of all these elements in I think something that could really be helpful to all of us in understanding our lives. So let's start with the Titanic, okay? So 1912, the year is 1912, exactly 1 century ago. And if you're in the mood of the time, people were basking in the glories and in the benefits that was considered to them quite advanced of the Industrial Revolution. Remember, you had electricity then, the steam engine. The world had changed from an agricultural culture, an agricultural society. It turned into a industrial society, and there were tremendous changes in that 19th century and the beginning of the 20th. In the early part of the 20th century, they were riding high. Overconfidence, prosperity, relatively. No one had a clue of the dark clouds that were looming that would soon wreak devastation, unimaginable on Earth. So the Titanic was interesting. It was a very watershed moment. Maybe that's one of the reasons that its memory remains unsinkable, even if the ship hasn't been. Because it captured the mood of the time. The name itself, Titanic. It captures opulence, overconfidence, arrogance in a way, the hubris of the times. So then when it sank on April 15th, on that Sunday night, it was quite a shock, because it was considered to be, it was the largest man-made object on Earth. And it symbolized all that power. It was built with that in mind. So on its maiden voyage, how ironic does that get? With some of the wealthiest people on board, this great ship goes down, humbled simply by an iceberg. They blame that on the Jews too, right? You know the joke, right? They blame the Titanic sinking. They say, how could you blame it on the Jews? He says, iceberg. He says, what's iceberg? He says, Goldberg. Goldberg, Hirschberg, iceberg. It's one berg or another. So it captured that type of shock. But things would get a lot worse, obviously. Notwithstanding the tragedy of the Titanic, things would get a lot worse, and a lot more things would sink before the sun would rise. Because just after 1912, a few years later, came the Russian Revolution, which was followed by the First World War, followed by the Second World War. It's a period of a few decades. The world sank into the deepest abyss, the bloodiest period of all of human history. Over 100 million people died in the 2 world wars. 100 millions more were wounded, displaced, devastated, families torn apart. I mean, everything changed after that. It's hard to even imagine the 2 worlds. I mean, just the amount of deaths is staggering. For Jews, of course, it had its implications in the deepest way. A third of our nation was decimated. Some of the best, and the most subhuman fashion. We saw humans at their worst. So, in the height of arrogance, in the height of overconfidence, height of prosperity, of the Industrial Revolution, we saw the worst human things. You know, the Nazis embraced Nietzsche's Übermensch, the Superman, and in turn turned out to behave more subhuman than anyone ever before them. And then the interesting paradox, the second half of the 20th century, is like a real study in contrast, the exact opposite. Some of the greatest achievements in medicine, in science, technology, that are still accelerating today, freedoms that are flourishing, many of the great gifts that we have, was also born in the 20th century. So you have a century that, side by side, the worst and the best. I know Charles Dickens wrote that about the time of the Tale of Two Cities, but nothing compared to the 20th century. We never fell so low, we never climbed so high. So when you think about it in context, 1912, nobody knew what was coming. Now, 100 years later, we do. We saw it. And there's tremendous lessons to be learned from this, because we saw what humans are capable of, both ways. But we still have not developed a formula of how you really deal with this. You know, today we have our own level of prosperity and arrogance. And it has its downside. You know, the greed, the economic imbalance, all the different things that the clock is ticking, like a time bomb that's ticking. You know, where are we going? Where's capitalism going to be in a few years from now? And it's interesting, 2012, we're also at the beginning of a century. And today we're humble enough to know that don't make any predictions. They didn't know 1912 was coming, we don't know what's coming. You know, please God, that only blessings will come. And I'm not suggesting another world war, God forbid. But there are lessons that we've learned from these elements here. And this has a lot to do with our attitude to the modern world, to the gifts of our times, and how you use it, how you don't use it. So one could take the attitude, you know, look, the Nazis, they took technology, medicine, and turned it into a death machine. Doctors who took an oath never to touch someone used human beings as animal experiments. This was not a third world country that you could dismiss as some type of primitive, savage rituals. Germany was top of there in philosophy, in music, in art, in etiquette. Consider themselves so Western, so modern, so aristocratic, and they worked overtime to figure out how do you kill more people in 1 hour, efficiently. They found Zyklon gas. They found some insecticide that you use on insects. That's the way you kill the most efficient way. So they used technology. Had they, God forbid, gotten the atom bomb, who knows what they would have done. So one could argue, technology is a very nice gift, but look what can happen with it. Give it put in the wrong hands, it destroys the world. And it did. And almost did. You know, just a little few things would have happened a little differently. Who knows where we'd be today. And so how is one supposed to look at all these offerings? The Titanic, as I said, was built in an environment of confidence, of opulence. Whether they said it was unsinkable, this is debatable, doesn't matter, but that was the impression. You know, mighty ship. And then, a mighty ship as big as it is, the ocean, it's no match for an ocean which is infinitely greater. So there are lessons to be learned in all of this. But an interesting thing that I'd like to share with you, this is not known. Whatever thing I've said till now, in the last 100 years, it's all been documented. We know about the world wars, we know what humans are capable of, both directions. We know what happened to the Titanic. But here's something you probably do not know. The Talmud says, preceding an illness is always a cure. That before any illness comes, the seed of the cure is born. So the same year, 1912, same year, and you'll see how uncannily close to the other events, in a small little town in the south of France, a place called Menton, a visionary of the highest order, a mystic, a sage, I'll tell you who he is in a few moments, began to develop I would say, the Titanic of all discourses, in mystical, Kabbalistic and Hasidic discourses, that contains within it formulas and algorithms, how to deal with these precise challenges that the 20th century would be plagued by. Balancing great success and remaining humble. Balancing ego and higher purpose. Balancing self-interest and the powers that we have with coexistence. It's not such a simple, how do you do that? When you don't have success, you don't have tools, you could say, okay, listen. But when things are going very well, it's much far harder to create a healthy environment. Dysfunctionality is always a byproduct of comfort zones and the overconfidence that they create. So he began developing this discourse and was a Titanic of its own. 37 days to the day after the Titanic sank, on April 15th, 1912, on May 22nd, 1912, which was the first day of Shavuos, it will be 100 years next week. Okay. Well, May 22nd is actually coming now, but I mean the Hebrew calendar. He began to deliver this discourse, which would be known as Hemshech Ayin Beis. Literally means, Hemshech means a series of discourses that would extend with Titanic proportions. For over 4 years he would deliver this. Over 144 discourses, a series, and then would continue to write it till almost the last day of his life, 1920. And it's an unbelievable book, series of books. There's 3 volumes. And it contains within it some of the deepest concepts about the unconscious, how the unconscious communicates to the conscious. It's profound ideas that I submit here as revolutionary as Einstein's theory of relativity. I know I'm saying a strong statement. And it has profound psychological insight, cosmic, spiritual, and it's really a blueprint that offers all kinds of modalities that have to obviously be deciphered and gleaned from it in life today, and address the biggest issues that would plague the 20th century, and in many ways still plague us, even though, thank God, we have learned our lessons about war, hopefully. So to celebrate this centennial, and most importantly, this is maybe the best kept secret. No one knows about this. This is probably the first time you're ever hearing it that exists. So I, in the last year, began actually studying it and teaching it online as well, and developed a website called ayinbeis.com. Ayin Beis is the equivalent of the year 72, which is the Hebrew year that we're in, 100 years, dedicated to opening up this revolutionary text to the world. And we're about to unveil something, a sneak preview you can get soon if you go to this website, ayinbeis.com. But it really is the basis of many of the teachings I share here, but far beyond even that, because there's literally in there unbelievable ideas that parallel quantum mechanics, psychology in the highest level. And as I said, the whole section explores just the ideas of the unconscious, and how the unconscious mind works, and how it communicates with the conscious mind. Pretty amazing stuff. And literally you can take out of it, as I said, modalities of even mediation. Mediation, I use it, some of its ideas, applying it to mediation between husbands and spouses, between family members, communities. It can be developed into nations, educational models. It's a very profound and very dense and extremely powerful series of discourses. And it does answer those challenges. So I don't think it's a coincidence that he began delivering it just a few weeks after the sink of the Titanic. Actually, it was developed before the maiden voyage. But it wasn't just the Titanic. It was, as a visionary, having a sense of where the world was headed. Because people who have a bird's eye view see the bigger picture, and they see the challenges. So I can't say that, I'm not going to make any bold statements that the Rebbe Rashab knew the world wars were coming. But when you're a smart person and you are able to see the big picture, you see the seeds of things. Russia then was ready. The world of the czars were ending in 1912. It was just a matter of time. The rebellions had begun. It's just they weren't overthrown yet. Tsar Nicholas. But the seeds of dissent were there. And recognizing all of this, I submit that the Rebbe Rashab prepared, as I said, a cure before the illness, an entire discourse, an entire book, like a blueprint that could help us all. So I thought it's a great challenge to climb this Mount Everest, try to decipher it, and do it in a way like obviously it's in its original Hebrew, but once you interpret it, and I begin to translate it and also adapt it, a lot of people are looking into that. I know people don't know, that have never before don't even have to know any Hebrew at all or know any prior knowledge. These things can be interpreted and explained in simple English. And my goal is really to create almost like a platform where there can be forum and discussions and so on. So I just wanted to share that. But let's take it back to the topic at hand. And here's the Tale of Two Titanics. So the Titanic in its symbolism also captures the idea of when you're riding high, when things are going well, when we're overconfident, we usually make our biggest mistakes. And on every possible level, it is humility that opens up the door to growth. This is in relationships absolutely the case. Because when you're in a relationship with someone, and you're very sure about something, and the other person is also very sure, you know what ends up happening. Like that joke where the woman says, when we were dating, he did all the speaking and I did all the listening. In the first few years of our marriage, I did all the speaking and he did all the listening. And now we both do the speaking and the neighbors do the listening. So there's a point where you get strong-headed and you're convinced you're right, another person convinced they're right, and then what do? And of course our blind spots and our subjectivity and our pride all comes into play, and it's one mess. Unfortunately, what I described now is not some exception. It's pretty common. This is in spousal situations. Then, of course, there's situations in communities, in families. So the issue of getting stuck in your ego, getting stuck, is always more amplified when there is success. Because when you're successful, you don't feel you have to adjust anything. Everything is working. And it usually leads to some form of hubris, some form of arrogance, some form of feeling, I must be doing everything right. And of course, those are the times it's the hardest to really reach someone when they think they're riding high. It's the cracks in our lives that create openings. But do we have to wait for a crack to happen in order to communicate with someone? Unfortunately, that's often what happens. When they say the 12-step program, you have to often hit rock bottom before you go for help. Because as long as you think everything is going well, even if it's not perfect, but the known evil is always better than the unknown evil. Status quo is a much more powerful force than we'll ever imagine. It's a status quo. It takes a lot more energy to get out of a status quo than to stay there. So you need a lot stronger reason to get out of a situation, even if it's not a great situation, than to stay. Because to stay doesn't require more effort. You're ready, you're used to this. So therefore this whole theme that I'm discussing here really is about how you balance the two. Now philosophers have always struggled with this issue with the ego. Is it a source of all vice? Is it a source of all motivation? And so on. Just to use an economic model for it. The essence of the capitalist versus the socialist argument is that capitalism, Adam Smith, is that yes, greed is a very key component in it all, but without that, if there's no self-interest, people are not going to be motivated to work. And to suggest that everybody's going to just work hard and all their money will be put into one pool doesn't work. And time has proven that to be the case. So though capitalism is, yes, built on an inherent self-interest model, but whether it's Adam Smith's invisible hand or the checks and balances of the marketplace, or however wants the regulators, if they work. That somewhere there is some type of checks and balances that keeps people to some extent honest. Well, there's arguments that that's not necessarily the case. That's an illusion. And we've seen in the last few years how bankers, people who are supposed to be the stewards of our economy, are the most corrupt of them all. And you don't have to be brilliant to realize, to be a little skeptical. If you see a few corporate heads get caught in corruption, you can pretty rest assured that more of them just didn't get caught. Like they say, the stupid ones got caught. But so the question is, how deep is it? Some of us don't even want to know. Because we don't want to find out that everybody's corrupt. Then what confidence can we have? So all these benefits of our lives is a double-edged sword. And sometimes, when you really get hurt, you say to yourself, the hell with this world. Maybe I should just go off and live on some farm, go back to nature, get out of this whole marketplace, this whole hectic, this whole super hypercharged, hyperkinetic energy that we're in, especially when you're in New York, and settle down somewhere and just enjoy life, nature, and stop having all these addictions to action and to excitement, and that's always going to lead to some disappointment. And there's a strong argument for that, which is the ascetic lifestyle. Many people were very, very intrigued by when they traveled to India in the 60s and 70s, and they saw a certain peacefulness in the monastic lifestyle of quiet place, solitude. You appreciate the things that matter. There's patience. You take a drink of water, you think about every drop of water. You're not just running to the next appointment. Just taking in, smelling the flowers in a real positive way. Can we really love people, love ourselves, love others without that type of deliberation and patience? Respecting the things that emerge in life. You plant a seed, it takes time for it to grow. You can't rush it. Today we'd rather find some way to super hormonize the plants, and it should grow overnight. We should have trees growing. They haven't mastered that art yet, but that idea, the fast food thing, quick results, I've got to move on, I have other things to do. The idea that real truths emerge and you can't acquire them. We live in an acquisition-oriented society, we buy things. Everything is commerce, everything is acquired. Acquisitions and commodities and consumerism and all of that. It's true, we're all addicted, I include myself, I live in this world as you do. But when things are going all right, nobody usually questions things. When things don't go all right, you start wondering, maybe this whole model is a very unhealthy one that we've just gotten trapped into. And then we're not even getting into now money and the power and the distortions that money creates in our lives, what we're ready to do for it, how much we're ready to sell out for it. And then, of course, we start wondering what exactly is a healthy human being in the first place, and how many of us are healthy. And what are our values and our priorities? So you can say the modern world is a world of evil in a way. I say the word evil is a strong word, but you could see it as a real adversary. It almost is a constant assault against everything that matters. The things that matter, like love, truth, God, soul. We don't live in environments that really are conducive for that. And what our environment does is, since we need it, so they create a little workshop for that too. So that's you need a little nature, we'll give you Central Park. You need a little God, meditate for an hour. In other words, we carve out, the world is not naturally gravitating there, we live in a different type of world, but we need a little of that, so we have that too. Which is this obviously defeats the whole purpose. The whole purpose, as I said, which is why it's so attractive when you start thinking about a different type of lifestyle. Most of us obviously are not going to go to that more ascetic, monastic type of lifestyle, just not our style. We're not used to it. But some do. Often the people that do, who've gotten burned out, they just can't handle it anymore. So one could really say this fear of modernity is a very legitimate one. And indeed, you find a root for it even in the Torah. You find back in the times of the Bible, when the Jews were on their way to the Promised Land, so Moses sent scouts to check out Israel. The scouts were the best of the people. They were the best of the. They were the leaders of the communities, each leaders of the tribes. And what they come back with is a terrible report. They come back with, instead of saying, here's the best way to enter the land, how are we going to conquer the land, they came back and say, Eretz Echel es Yishvel. 3 words captures the whole thing. It's a land that consumes its inhabitants. We can't go there. It'll destroy us. Driven by, it was the Wall Street of the times, of those times. Driven by power and arrogance and aggression. We want to stay here in the wilderness, separate from civilization. We're protected by the clouds of glory. We have bread from heaven. We have water. No, we're living in our little isolated community. Why do we need to go into this new world? Which of course was a grave sin, because they were challenging God's promised land. God said, this is where I want you to go. And the question is asked, what was their sin? What was their mistake? They were great men. They were sent to scout out. They came back with a bad report. Why'd you send us if you don't want to hear what we have to say? The answer is, they were not sent to find out whether we should enter the land. They were sent to figure out how to enter the land. They crossed the line, the cardinal sin, that God gives you life and say, I can't handle it, so I want to commit suicide. That was never given you your choice life. Life was given to you as a gift. You figure out how. The soul goes down to this earth, and this is how it's explained. It has challenges. Of course, a soul would prefer not to be on this world. This world is filled with challenges. It's a world where the evil, wicked prosper, the good suffer. Things are not fair. From a spiritual point of view, which soul would want to enter in this type of world? Which indeed is why it says in the Mishnah, an interesting statement, Al karcha chatachai. You're forced to live. The soul is commanded, coerced. You must go down and live in this world. Because this is the purpose of what God created. He wanted a world that is dark and cold and devoid of spirit on a conscious level. And I want you, the soul, to work hard and figure out and find your way. Find the spirituality in a dark world. To find soulfulness in heaven, where there's no materialism and there's no material world, there's no big achievement. This is like the core essence of Kabbalistic and mystical thinking. The truth is, it's also practical in a way. Where does the soul come from? So the Torah's view is the soul comes from a spiritual place, thrust into a material world. And the soul does not want to be here. Why would anyone want to come to a world like this? When you're living in a world where there's peace, love, coexistence, study, prayer, you're connecting to your source, transcendence. Who needs a world like this that's distraction from all of that? Now, we may not identify with the soul's voice, but when you think about it, it sounds pretty, it resonates. We already face realities. We are here. We don't have a choice. But the soul does have a choice, and has to be told, this is where I want you to go. You'll be trapped. You'll feel like you're in prison. But figure out a way to get out of prison, and figure out how to teach your body and your material part of your life to also experience transcendence. So we have that voice inside of us all the time. It's that restless angst that each person has, that they want something and they don't exactly know what it is. Some of us replace it. Some of us replace it with all kinds of other ways of self-medicating. We can replace it with drugs, we can replace it with alcohol, we can replace it, as I said, with all kinds of forces, some healthy, some not healthy, that feed that so-called restlessness. But the soul is a restless force that's looking for transcendence. Human beings are not satisfied with animal bliss. We want more. For many people, the pursuit of money, power, and honor replace the pursuit of the soul. Or it's really the soul, but it's now been hijacked by self-interest. But every human being is looking for some of that type of relief. The relief that we cannot just go on day by day, the same grind, the same monotony. We're looking for something different. And when we are hungry enough and there's a deep vacuum, we're going to explode. And unfortunately, often we will reach out to whatever it is that will feed us. So if you're traveling in a desert and for days and weeks and months you haven't drank any water, someone gives you something to drink, you won't even think twice, you're just going to what's it called? Not gobble it down. Guzzle it down. There you go. Good. And you may find out it's toxic, it's poison, but you were thirsty. When you're desperate, you do anything. And this is the root of all addictions, and the root of all, animals don't get addicted to things. The only time they get addicted is if humans impose it on them for experimental purposes. Because they have a natural balance. How do we get addicted? Because we have a personality that's hungry. And the more creative, more energetic you have, the more potential addiction you're going to get, because you need some relief. You're not satisfied with just things the way they are. This is the drive, the human drive. From the Torah point of view, that's the soul at work. So the soul speaks to you all the time. Every time you have anxiety, it's the soul speaking. Remember, corpses don't have anxiety. It's only live people. Live people have anxiety because there's an imbalance. So the whole challenge is, how do you realign yourself? How do you gain that balance? So the fear, going back, the fear of a world that seems so foreign and so antithetical to godliness, to soulfulness, was a fear even the scouts back then had, but they were wrong. And it was a grave sin, because God said, I never asked you whether we go into the promised land. I told you to figure out how. Whether, that I told you, I'm sending you there. That's where you go. The soul is not asked whether you're going into this world or not. No soul would agree if it was asked. So the soul has to be coerced to go. And while it's here, it retains its transcendent qualities, and its mission is to help spiritualize the material world. And that's how you relieve the tension between those two worlds, between those two voices in us. The voice of transcendence and the voice of existence or survival. So then the question is how? If this world poses its challenges, and it's easy for us to be, as I said, a land that consumes its inhabitants, so it's understandable why so many Orthodox Jews would want to gather 42,000 of them and more, and figure out ways how to insulate ourselves from these vices, from these evils. What's the other approach? Is to just say, you know what, we live in a modern world, let modernity prevail at the expense of these values. So we have these two extremes. Either it's insulation, or it's total engagement. Which one is it? Total immersion. And this challenge, by the way, it's not by the way, but very directly relevant, we all have also in our lives. Which extreme do we go? How do we reconcile these two things? So usually, as I said earlier, most of us opt for compartmentalization. That's the default choice. And when you have two voices inside of you, you compartmentalize. You create weekends for transcendence, and the rest of the week you're busy, you're overwhelmed by your work or something like that. We create our compartmentalization. Judaism actually teaches that that you don't need compartmentalization is not the ultimate answer. The ultimate answer is that you could integrate the two. But for that you need to have a lot more deeper spiritual fortification, or else you will be overcome by the world around us. So here, let's just take just basic human biology. Well, biology is not the right word. Just the way we develop as from children into adults. Just let's do an imaginary exercise. What would we be like if as soon as we pop out of our mother's womb, upon birth, you're immediately sent to work? You have to go to get a job and deal with all the challenges of the workplace. I understand you'll say, well, a baby's not capable. Let's, for argument's sake, we were born with the capacity to be there. It'd be a big problem. We have difficulty enough dealing with that world with 20 years or 30 years of education, let alone if suddenly we have to be thrust in that world, it would be just impossible. We would all be overwhelmed. So God in His benevolence created a system that you're not just thrown into the world. You acclimate yourself to it. For 9 months, you spend inside your mother's womb. So you're protected, nurtured, fed, no worries at all. That's the first transition. Then you're born, and even though the umbilical cord is cut, you're still protected, nurtured. And again, I'm assuming it's a healthy home. Protected, nurtured, provided for every possible way. And slowly do you develop independence. The stages of growth. You begin to realize there's a world around you, there's other people. The first day you go to school, first day you go away for the summer, first time you leave home for a semester. We've all gone through these stages. And what's happening here essentially is you're being trained. Again, I'm talking the best scenario. I'm not talking about an aborted childhood or a dysfunctional home, which just obviously just accentuates all the problems. In a healthy home, a child is essentially being educated to prepare and be reinforced, fortified. So the day comes when you're able to, when you leave school and you finally have to go out there in a more hostile world, you are well armed. You have an arsenal, whether it's education, whether it's a little experience, whether it's guidance, whether it's knowing that you have the security of a home that is there for you. It would be like a bird. Before a bird flies, it needs the time that it spends as a fledgling and as a little bird under the protection of its mother. Different animals obviously have different periods of time. Some very early on, they're sent away. But everyone has a period where they are nurtured first. So in a healthy situation, essentially we all begin in an insulated, protected environment. And the stronger you're built up there, the more powerful you have the ability to then go fly. Once you have a healthy nest, you have the confidence, the security to fly. A bird didn't have a healthy nest, it would never have the security to fly. It would never know that it can come back, has a place to rest its head. So life, the way it's structured, you don't need any major thesis around this, is that's how all of us grow up. The sad part is, as I mentioned, is if we don't have healthy parents, and we have an abusive or dysfunctional or absentee home, that's where we're not even, then of course it stunts and aborts and challenges our whole process of growth, because the years you needed to build up confidence, security were somewhat compromised. But assuming even the best case scenario, everyone needs this early stage. In a mystical language, it means before you go out into a world that is going to be challenging in the context of good and evil, challenging context of morals, self-interest, you have years of being protected, nurtured, being prepared, acclimated to then engage, assimilate in the world like that. Should you not have the preparation properly, you will not be able to enter properly. If you're thrust into the world too early, you can be hurt by it. If you're thrust in too late, you'll be too mature, you'll remain too protected. So this dance, this balance is something that Judaism always struggled with. How much to engage and how much not to. So look at the beauty of a Jewish calendar. You have 6 days of the week, and then you have Shabbat. In the 10 Commandments, it says 6 days you shall work, 7th day you shall rest. Let's just talk about that for a moment. Very simple on a very simple level. Interesting, the mitzvah to keep Shabbat is also a mitzvah to work on 6 days. Some people don't know that part. So it means because you were sent to work, you were sent to produce. But if you are a constant machine, even the machines have to take a time off. You have to shut down a machine. You have to rest it for a while. The human spirit needs a certain rhythm. We go to sleep at night, which means the machine has to refresh itself, rejuvenate. So through the week, that's the same thing. 6 weeks, immerse yourself in a world that's not easy, in a world of competition, of marketplace pressures, of greed, of selfishness, of all the stuff that we see. And then Shabbat, 7th day, go back home, so to speak. Go back to your nest and rejuvenate, refresh yourself, reconnect. So you can take on another week. And this is the balance, this is the dance. Within the Jewish day, so-called the Jewish schedule during the day, when you wake up, don't just run to work. Say a few prayers, study something, do a mitzvah, give some charity, and then go to work. Everybody in their own so-called schedule. Because we need this balance. Because too much immersion is going to overwhelm you, and too little will stunt your growth. It's a constant need for both elements. And no one has a perfect formula, because each person is different. But it's the equivalent of a healthy parent letting a child learn to make its own mistakes, or learn to walk on its own feet. You're going to have some restraint. You can't constantly overprotect or crowd your child, or else you won't let them grow on their own. On the other hand, a healthy parent also knows that you need to also be there. You can't just say, I'm throwing you out of the house, go figure it out. How much of this, how much of that is a more complicated formula. It requires patience. Different children are different. No two are alike. There's no cookie cutter model. When people come to me often, they say, I made some money. I'd like to go to Israel for a year to study. My question I always ask is, there's no rule. If are you going for the right reasons? If a person is mature and healthy, and they are in a secure place, you could do it. But for some people, it's not the right reason. They're escaping their lives, and they're just looking for some panacea. Sometimes that's not the way to go. In other words, you have to know when to engage and when to disengage. When to hold them and when to fold them. And this is actually a secret of life in general. And it's not easy to answer because each of us are in a different place. How much we should have of each, it depends on where you are. But one thing is for sure, you need a balance. And I can tell you also, rest assured, even though I don't know your lives, I can guarantee you probably don't have a balance. Because we live in a world of imbalance and demands and pressures. And when you're in the rat race, it's hard to step back and say, I'm in too much or I'm in not too much, because you're in it. You're blinded by your own lifestyle or your own life routines. So to go back now to modernity and faith and internet. So let's start with a Talmudic statement, Mishnah. A Roman philosopher asks Rabbi Akiva, the sages actually, I don't know if it's Rabbi Akiva, if God didn't want idolatry, sun worshippers and moon worshippers, why didn't he destroy the sun and the moon? And the sage answers, should God then destroy his world because of the fools? That's what he says. In other words, because some fools, in their own delusion, they begin to worship the sun and the moon, so God's going to go destroy his world because some people don't know how to appreciate it. The Teishis Yontif, the commentary asks, so was there no follow-up question? Why didn't God destroy the fools? That seems like a good question. And of course the answer to that is, there's this thing called free will. The point is, the soul comes down here below, we have choice. We have choice. And that cannot be taken away. So you have here, in one sentence, a fascinating insight. Human beings have abused the world in which we live in from the beginning of time. We've abused the environment. We've abused each other. We've taken resources of the earth, used it for our own selfish purposes. We've polluted. We've done plenty of damage. We also have done great things as well. Are you looking at me like what? Like what? You want a list? We've done a few good things, I think. But the question is, so because we destroy something, or we take a gift, and we don't know how to use it well, we abuse it, should God destroy this gift? Should we not get the gift? In the late 40s, there was this debate. It was before my time, but you read about it, about atomic energy. So after Americans dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the devastation it unleashed, so there was this debate in the schools here. So there was a little girl once came to see the Rebbe, and he asked her, what you're studying in school about atomic energy. And so, you have any questions? She said, yeah, we're wondering whether atomic energy is a good thing or a bad thing. Children, everything is simplistic, good or bad. So the Rebbe answered her, I have this story in my book, Torah, Meaningful Life, that, let me ask you, is a kitchen knife a good thing or a bad thing? So, a good educator, that's how a good educator answers a question, makes you think. I'm not going to give you the answer, I'll make you figure out the answer, I'll give you the tools to figure out. The girl thought after a while and she figured out. Depends how you use it. First it confuses you when you're a child. It's true, a knife, is it good or bad? A knife you can stab someone, God forbid. But a knife also you can cut certain foods in. So it depends how you use it. In other words, there's an area called neutral. Technology was not created by man. Electricity was not created by man. We discovered that within nature there are forces, long before we're around, that we've learned to tap and generate. So we created the devices and the appliances and the machinery to tap into. We create subatomic particles. Quantum mechanics is the study of realities that are existent long before our awareness of them, and understanding them teaches us their laws, and their laws, observing their laws, teaches us how to learn to manipulate them, and thus we have microchips, and thus we have other technologies that are based on observation, experimentation, trial and error. So God created a beautiful universe. It has enormous forces in it. Those are neutral. Depends what you do with them. You use them for the good, so they're tremendous forces for good. You use them for negative, they can destroy in ways that nothing can destroy. Energy we have today, with a nuclear energy, you can destroy far more than just the plain energy we had 100 years ago. So, understanding the world is, yes, you can take the maraglim, the scouts approach, the fear, for one. Say, I don't want to go there, it's too dangerous. You look what people have done with it. I'm not sure, I can't even trust myself. What will happen if I get too wealthy? I may succumb to what others have succumbed to. I'll also sell out. So let's just avoid that. That's not the Torah approach. On the other hand, let's just embrace it all as if, cockily, like the Titanic attitude. And we can just take on anything, we're all powerful. And no one can stop us, is equally destructive. So finding that middle place, what we call humility. Moses was a great man. He had unbelievable qualities and resources. But what made him humble? Because he deluded himself into not knowing he's a special guy? No. He knew, but he said to himself, these qualities of mine, these virtues, are not, I didn't make them. They were given to me. And had someone else been blessed with them, they would have accomplished more than I have. Now this, of course, requires a true man of God, a true humble person to realize that. When you study Ayin Beis, the discourse I was discussing, this is what you learn. You learn how to channel the most powerful forces by recognizing there's something higher than you. And this doesn't happen overnight. Remember, our egos are very powerful. And when your ego coupled, fueled by success, a person could be pretty dangerous. Smart people maybe know how to hide their tracks, and not smart people don't hide them so much. But when you couple ego plus success, it's always a volatile combination, because you know what's going to happen. Success can exaggerate the ego, can exacerbate it, and the ego then becomes even more powerful, and you can do no wrong. Arrogance. Look at some of these people who are on their climb to success. Everybody wonders, how could they be so stupid? Elliot Spitzer. People running for office. They know they're in the public eye. They know today you can trace anything. And still they did all kinds of seemingly like novice mistakes. Don't ever underestimate the power when you think you're in power. It deludes. And at some point you can think you're infallible. And it makes no sense. You'll do things that you wouldn't advise your friend not to do. But you yourself will do because you think, I'll get away with it. It's a psychological syndrome. It's been documented. Because success plus ego is very, very dangerous. So in the beginning of the 20th century, that was a watershed moment. History was changing. An old world order was turning into a new world order. So it'd be interesting to think if they had all learned Ayin Beis before World War I, whether maybe things would have gone differently. Two world wars like that, one after the other. One is not enough. World War I was the worst war till that point, and World War II was worse than World War I. It's hard to imagine how within a period of 30 years there would be so much death. Today, I'm not saying people necessarily are better, but there's that fear hangs over us. So when there's the Cuban Missile Crisis, other things, if all sides know that we don't want to destroy ourselves again this way. So maybe it's the fear of extinction, whatever it may be. You have to say that the seeds then were planted, that were it was almost like an inevitability. Because when you throw in success, you throw in technology, and ego comes into play, it can create much more destruction than when you're just living in a little shtetl or in an environment where you don't have such power. Analyses are endless about the German war machine. Would they have even been able to rise to power if they didn't have some of the modern technologies, some of the modern weapons? Because a lot of what the Germans did was very much connected to modernity. They used modern weapons. The Blitzkrieg was the thing that they innovated. It was based on air warfare. Airplanes were relatively new in 1945. They were just a decade or two old. As I said, atomic energy they were on the verge of getting. In 1946, if they would have had it already. It was just 1 year earlier. The Americans got it. Today, imagine, God forbid, Hitler had risen in an age like ours. What is possible to be done today? So, great power leads to great devastation and great destruction. And Ayin Beis is a profound discourse, which, as I said, I've been studying it almost close to a year now. The more I study it, the more I'm amazed by it. There's tremendous insight into this whole issue of the ego. I've never seen anywhere such sophisticated approach to understanding the ego, understanding the self. And more importantly, a formula how you take the self and not annihilate. Because again, goal is not annihilation. It's not like destroying the world. We're not destroying the sun, the moon, and technology. It's learning how to harness it. Really learning to understand yourself. How you can be a person who's in control. In addiction, they always say the challenge is who's the master and who's the slave. If you're not the master, something is mastering you, that's addiction. If you're the master, then they're not dependent on something else. The same is true when it comes to the ego, and some is true when it comes to our own self-interest. We all have self-interest. The question is who's the master. If that becomes the master and that controls your life, you're in for trouble. Maybe not today, tomorrow, because you're in a collision course. That we have self-interest and we know it, and it's harnessed, and you have it under check, under control, tamed. That's the key. So there are not many books you read that really help you look at that. Ayin Beis is a book like that. It gives you this type of microscope to focus on yourself, and you see dimensions of yourself, and it helps tame you. Above all, not just tame you, creating a lack of overconfidence, understanding there's a bigger picture. And the more you get connected to something like that, the better you find balance. Because ultimately the imbalances come from the self-focus, self-absorption, and determining this is the way it is and not that way. Convince you got it right. And you can't hear someone else. Unfortunately, as I said, most of the time we are able to hear someone else is when we're broken. Things don't work, when things don't work, you're suddenly forced to acknowledge I have to do something about it. You hear all the people I mentioned before, the 12-step program. The first of the 12 steps is I acknowledge I surrender to a force greater than me because I'm not in control of my life. It takes a lot to say it makes a statement like that. Not just make it, but live that way. It means you must have been really broken. Because who that has a healthy pride is going to ever say, I surrender, that I'm not in control of my life? Nobody likes to make such a statement. But acknowledging that when you're in that place, it comes from great strength and courage, and it's the beginning of healing. So obviously, Ayin Beis teaches us to get there before you have to be completely broken. So it's about teaching. So there's really two ways to teach a person to be humbler. One is, unfortunately, negative experiences in life, losses, trauma, transitions, deaths, unfortunately. And another is exposing yourself to higher truths. And when you see those higher truths, in its own way, it suddenly says, 1 second, I don't have it all figured out. There's a bigger picture here. So I'm suggesting that we have the opportunity, the latter, So we don't have to wait for the former. Of course, it's also a blessing that nobody should have to ever go through the former, because when we're broken, sometimes not exactly in ways that we can handle. Being broken is not a very pleasant experience. So if you break yourself in a good way, it can preempt the need to be broken in a bad way. I think that's a pretty good deal. But you have to be wise, because again, when you're riding high, you say to yourself, listen, I'm never going to break. Nothing's ever going to happen to me. So you don't prepare in the years of plenty for the years of famine. But the wise people do. It's called investing, diversification. I mean in the spiritual sense of the word. So, going back to this whole internet, I don't like to criticize my own friends and colleagues and so-called religious Jews, but the fact of the matter is, defense does not work in this world. Maybe when we lived in a shtetl 500 years ago, where there were no other options. So then, you basically put up your walls and make sure that someone moves into town that may be offensive or problematic, you get rid of them. I'm not saying necessarily that should be the approach, but that was the approach. You could at least control it. It would be like your own home, and if you have a guest that is being inappropriate, you tell the guest, goodbye. I have my children here, I don't need you here. You want to say it pleasantly, you can say it pleasantly. But we don't live in a world like that. You can put up the highest ghetto walls, and you cannot protect yourself from the waves that enter through the walls. What's called radio waves, television waves, internet waves. So fine, yes, you can ban the internet, you can ban television and radio, but then there's a thing called a telephone. It's called a cell phone. And a cell phone today is a smartphone. And if you're in business, you probably want to need to use something of that nature. So how exactly are you going to compartmentalize and say, I'm going to use it for this, but I'm not going to use it for that? Yes, if you want to choose a life, a monastic life, and move away from all the technology, as I said before, that's not what the Torah advocates. But if you want to do that, at least I can understand, okay, you're choosing. But you're going to engage in the world in order to make money from it, but you're not going to engage. It doesn't work that way. Once you open up a dialogue between you and technology, you can't say, okay, I'm going to filter in and not filter that. Even if you technically create such filters, psychologically you can't. Because at some point people grow up and become adults. First time we got a computer in my house, so my daughter asked me if she should put on parental controls for me. You understand? Meaning, parental controls controlling the parent from seeing the wrong things. So, because children know about computers better than the parents do. So it was an interesting insight of how we look at parental controls. Who's controlling whom? My point is that we all grow into adults, and what really stops a person sitting at the internet and no one's watching you? You can waste hours and hours and hours. I'm sure no one here wastes too many hours on the internet. I'm sure you probably don't know how many hours you do or don't, because it can be quite devastating if you find out. But we sit there, nobody's watching you. What stops a person from going and not just wasting time, but using internet for destructive purposes, or things that do not make your soul grow? Let's put it that way. What type of internal checks and balances do you have? Okay, so some of us have guilt, some of us have standards, some of us have values, but we all know we all have our darker moments when the standards and values suddenly go on the wayside. We have our addictions and our vices and stuff like that. What really is the solution? Is the solution to hitting rock bottom and becoming so addicted to porn or to some other thing that then you have to go do something about it because your life is falling apart? That option 2 that I mentioned. Is that the only real solution? What's the Torah solution for a thing like that? So you could say, I'll throw out the internet, I'll throw out all these machines, that way I don't have these challenges. Will that work? Is it even doable? Possible. The answer is offense. The best defense is offense. What does offense mean? I know this might sound almost like simplistic. When you're busy with doing good things, you don't have time, what's called, for nonsense. The brain only has that much space. unconscious mind can contain many ideas, but you can only focus on one thing at a time. So very technically speaking, if you didn't have to pay your bills and make some type of livelihood, and you just had all the time in your life, we'd probably be in big, big trouble. And people who have that do get into big trouble. So what's the solution? Solution is just to keep people busy making money or other survival needs. Solution is if you sense that you're on a mission and that you are an offense and you have a job to do, spiritual job to do. And even technology is part of the job you have to do. I cannot say it's a guarantee, but it's a very powerful preemptive measure. Because it lifts you up to another place where you're not just sitting there bored and now what do I do next? You have something you need to get done. And if it has spiritual quality in it, that becomes the best defense is that type of offense. You teach children to be fearful of all these enemies out there. And don't watch this, and be careful of that. And don't go here, don't go there. Yeah, that's good for short term, certain age. But you can't live your life like that. The only way is, you understand, the world is a difficult world. God told the scouts, it's a land, the scouts said rather, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. But you know something? You can tame that land, and your job is to figure out how to channel it toward a divine purpose. So then when a person hears, I have a temptation, that temptation itself is what is your mission, is to deal with that. It's not just, okay, I'm bored, and the question is whether I'm going to give in to some type of temptation or I'm not going to. So maybe 9 out of 10 you won't, but then there'll be the 10th time you will because you're weak, or you're in a moment of you lapse, or whatever, you just give up. But when you're in a mission where you are driven and said, listen, the soul was sent into this earth, there are temptations and challenges, and know that ahead of time, and they'll come your way. Your job is to figure out how to tame that world and channel it to something greater. Is it guaranteed? No, but at least you are driven with a purpose. You're on a mission. You may have your lapses, but it's a whole different attitude. Because your soul is filled with this mission all the time. And if you're excited about it, and you wake up and jump out of bed, the best solution to most problems is not to get bored in the first place. Not to hit rock bottom, but not to get bored. How do you not get bored in the first place? By filling your life up with something that is extremely exciting, but exciting for a healthy and higher purpose. There's really no other answer. Everything else is defense, which is short-term at best. And even short-term is questionable. And this, to me, is something that is lacking in what is being taught to, even in the Jewish religious world, the Torah world. It's taught about, let's fortify ourselves against the enemies. Fine, there are many verses that way. But what's missing is that your soul came down to, why did God send you to enemies in the first place? There's a purpose for that. And this gets into, as I said, you study Ayin Beis, you study other Hasidic texts, it's all what they talk about. Why the soul came down here. Why does it have to face all these difficulties, temptations, hostilities from within, from without? What are you supposed to do about it? And ultimately it comes down to, this is your mission. It's your life's mission. It's more important than your job, more important than all the money you make, more important than anything you're ever going to do. Because this is why you're here. Now, obviously, this can't be taught to someone overnight, especially if you've already been trained to think in different ways. But we could all begin somewhere. So I suggest, since we are about to approach Shavuos next week, and it's the 100th year of this discourse, so obviously, a discourse on its own is going to be difficult for most people to study. But I've been giving these classes, I have already like 120 videos recorded in English. It's on YouTube. It's called Ayin Beis channel on YouTube, right, like that. So here we go. That's my offense. YouTube got a lot of garbage to watch, so I don't have the time for it because I'm busy creating these videos of how to conquer YouTube and not how to succumb to it. So when you're busy with these type of things, you just don't have the time. So I am offering, inviting, and welcoming you all into this revolution. Let's call it that way. And you'd be amazed that once you uncover, you open up this type of book, it really does teach you tools, new tools. And it definitely could sound to some of you very exotic, like, what is this book? It's like you never heard such a thing. But trust me, I'm not talking about anything that's like mumbo jumbo. We're talking here about very profound psychological teachings. Yes, it's written in, if you read the original, it's probably going to be cryptic, but once it's deciphered, you will not believe how relevant it is. Guaranteed. So check it out. If you're interested in more information, I'll be happy to send you any links, but you just do Ayin Beis in Google, and maybe, who knows, maybe this is the next, beyond Facebook and Google, the real revolution, Google, Facebook is up to 910 billion people. I'm sorry, 910 million people. That would be a lot, 910 billion. But 910 million is still not even a sixth of the human race. So I think we have our competition. What do you think, Jeff? Look, it's only those that dream. It was Steve Jobs that said, only those that are crazy enough think that they can change the world are the ones that do. So, I've been accused of worse things than that, so let's try to be a little crazy. And hopefully together we can do something really powerful. So we're building it, we're still building it. I can't say it's full blown yet, but you can get definitely a sneak preview. And I hope at least I piqued your interest to look into it a little. And you'd be pretty surprised what you're going to find. So I'm creating a whole tools of how to do this. And the main goal, of course, is that each of us should be able to find in our own lives parallels of these ideas that we can apply and make relevant to our personal experiences. So in the final analysis, 42,000 people in Citifield, which I find ironic, place to protest modernity is in Citifield Stadium. The ultimate answer is offense. The ultimate answer is to teach ourselves and our children why we're here. That the internet is a gift that God gave us. Forces, not the internet per se, the machines, or the different websites and so on, but it's tools. It's a tool. It's a tool that was given to the soul in order to use to bring light to the world. And I don't just mean that as a nice bumper sticker. That's really so. And not only that, it's not just the internet, it's everything. Your gifts, whatever every one of you have, our intelligence, our emotional gifts, our skills, our talents, whether it's in one field or another, are blessings that you were given. What are you going to do with it? Is it just going to be a hobby? Is it just going to be a nice personal pursuit? Or can you use it as a tool, an instrument, an agent for some positive change in this world? That's the bottom line. Abraham, almost 4,000 years ago, taught us and pioneered this method. That you're here to serve, you're not here to serve yourself. You're here to serve a bigger cause. You're here to bring light into the world. You're here to give more than to take. And it's a different way of thinking that most of us think, because we're not taught to think that way. We're taught to think, figure out how to take care of your life, make as much money as you can, take, because you never know who's going to want to take it away from you. Well, Judaism taught a different approach. And Sinai, which we celebrate next week, is maybe the first information revolution. That's the first information was conveyed to this earth. And that information teaches us that information, like anything, is a gift. And if you understand it as a divine gift, then you see it as that type of opportunity. There was a chassid of the author of Tanya, the Baal Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, who was once in what was called Petersburg then. Now it's called Petersburg as well. The communists changed it to Leningrad, as in Lenin. And Peter was, of course, Peter the Great. The Tsar Peter of Russia, many years ago in the 16th century, I believe, 17th century. So he was in Petersburg, and he was walking the street, and he had a temptation. They don't say exactly what it was. He must have seen something. And he was about to give in to the temptation. You know what he said to himself? He says, how does it past? You know the word past? How do you translate past? It's a Yiddish word, which means, it's not. How is it appropriate? How is it fitting, respectable, for a person who's a chassid, a follower of my great teacher, to give into such a temptation? He used his ego to avoid the temptation. Not because he was at such a high level. He was tempted. But he said to him, it doesn't fit, that student of my teacher My great teacher should behave like that. So that's an offensive approach. What does that mean by offense? He didn't use it and say, I can't do this temptation because I'll be punished or because some other reason. He took a positive element of like pride. And sometimes pride can work against us, but sometimes pride can work for us. Pride. When you understand that you have a soul inside of you and you understand that you were sent on a mission, it makes it a lot more challenging when something tempts you. You say, I'm sent on a mission here. It's not appropriate for me to suddenly go off and do something else. And again, I'm not suggesting that just solves the problem, just this little statement. But when you start thinking this way constantly, it has to have an impact. It has to begin to make you more responsible because you think about my mission. Example, astronaut goes into outer space. Let's say it's a lifelong trip. In the future, where you're able to travel for years and years. And they put you into cyber freeze you or whatever it is, and you wake up like in 2001 film. You wake up in 10 years from now. And you have a set of instructions what you should be doing. And you know that you're now in outer space. And you're sent on a mission, and the whole earth is waiting for you to fulfill your mission. And then you have a temptation. You say, 1 second, why should I do this mission? Why me? You decide you're going to do something for your own interest and jeopardize the whole purpose of this mission. The mission is to save Earth in some way. It doesn't really matter. I'm just saying it's a mission. But the fact that if you're truly trained to be on this mission, and for years you were trained this way, there's going to be a voice in you that's going to say, 1 second, my self-interest, I'm ready to jeopardize a purpose that I'm here. Now, if you didn't know you had a mission, so you could say, I don't have a mission. Why am I doing this? Why am I wearing a uniform? Let me take it off. And then you find out in outer space, you take off the uniform, you die. That's another story. But if you know you're on a mission and it's ingrained in you, you think about things differently. Again, this does not mean guaranteed, doesn't mean that we don't fall. But generally speaking, your life is on a higher standard. As opposed to the way most of us are educated, we're not on any mission. We're here to take care of ourselves. The concept of a mission statement in life is pretty foreign to us. Businesses have mission statements. Human beings don't have missions. I do whatever I want. I want to make money. I want to be happy. I'll build a healthy family. That's what many people will say. Not necessarily in that order. But the point is that when you have a sense of purpose and higher purpose, and it becomes, the more it's ingrained in you, it is a very good preemptive medicine. And this is the thing that I think is lacking in the discourse. How do you infuse that into people? You know why it's lacking? Because this is the more difficult approach. This requires education. This requires early intervention. This is preemptive. We live in a world where pharmaceuticals control commerce. They want illness, then you sell more drugs. Preemptive medicine does not allow you to sell things. Okay, of course there's medicines they sell that are preemptive too. They promise that as well. But I mean to say real preemptive. If you live a healthy lifestyle and you don't need any of these medications, that's the healthiest of all. But that takes more patience and more work and more effort. In a fast food age like ours, you kill yourself and then you take a medication to save yourself. Like the guy said, I met a guy, how are you? He's 76 years old. He says, well, you spend half your life making money and the other half giving it to doctors. So I said, so you're coming out even? He says, almost. It's not even yet, but I'm getting there. I'm going to soon be at loss. Or that woman that says, my husband makes me sick, and then he takes me to the best doctors. So, you get all these cliches and ideas. You're laughing, what does this remind you of someone? Huh? Anyway, the point here is that we have the power to go on the offense. And each of you have it. But this requires real willpower. And always remember, the status quo is far more challenging than you think. Because it's an invisible chain, the status quo. The laws of science dictate that if something is in a position for a long period of time, to get it out of the position takes a lot more energy than to keep it there. For obvious reason. It's sitting there for so long. It's like, what's the word? It's gelled into position. It's frozen in position. And that's called inertia. And you need to have an energy to pull it out. We don't realize the power of the status quo because we are there. So you think, hey, it's not so bad, I'm here. But shift out of a situation. That's why I said trauma create cracks. Unfortunately, sometimes the only way to jolt you out of a place is shock treatment, and unfortunately not in a positive way, or something that shakes up your whole system. What I'm suggesting is we can shake up our system without waiting for that to happen, and that is by pulling yourself into a place like that. So one place to begin is maybe to take upon ourselves climbing Mount Everest of the mystical world. It's called Ayin Beis, and may we all benefit from this exhilarating journey. And I want to wish everybody the power. First of all, as I said, we should be blessed that we should not wait for cracks, that we should live lives that we break ourselves in healthy ways, so nothing else has to break us. Which is, in simple English, it means you should have blessed lives in very physical sense of the word, and health, and a parnasa, and finding healthy relationships, maintaining healthy relationships. And as I said, the Ayin Beis revolution is underway, right? A sneak preview will be going out. It always spooks me, these light things. I always feel like somebody's watching. You think so?
Yes.
I know someone's watching, but question who? So it's an honor, as always, to share a few words with you, and I hope it's been helpful to some extent to be able to help in your own struggles and convergence and fusion of forces. And next week we will do a pre-Shavuot workshop, which will be Wednesday before the holiday. I will be, just in case any of you are interested, I will be Shavuot celebrating in Riverdale, up in the Bronx. So if anybody's interested, I'll be speaking there, lecturing, teaching, and so on. Shavuot is a week from Saturday night. But this year, because of the Shabbat, so it goes from Shabbat right into Sunday and Monday. So we will have a class next Wednesday. Philip will not have a class tomorrow night. Yes, I've been forewarned. And Velva, you giving any classes in the near future? All the time. Velva's a good man to know. He's a good man to know. He's well connected, and also a warm soul. So if anyone is intimidated by me, you can speak to Velva. What else can I say is that we have the book Beyond the Letter of the Law here available, if you like, and the Omer book, as we wind down the last week of accounting. And we will be here, as I said, next Wednesday. And finally, if you haven't left us your email address, please do so. And hopefully I will try to make some noise the next coming months, good ways, and create some action. Time for it. So thank you very much.